A warm welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be in this seat right now. About to have a really critically important conversation with you all. So I'm just adding my welcome to that was given by Barbara. My name's Carol Campayne. I am the director of the diversity practice. I am also the founder of Different Women, Different Places, and I'm also one of the architects behind Borderless Coaching. And as I said, I've been waiting to be right here, right now for a very long time. So I want to say, in terms of where you are and in your space, really want to let you know that you're not here by accident, but rather by design. We believe that it is your calling and your mission that has brought you to this webinar today. And when we think about today, aren't we in extraordinary times? I think many have described this time as being unprecedented, unexplainable, apocalyptic, which means a time of real deep revelation. So it certainly is a different space that we are all in. And I believe that coaching has a critical role to play in how we respond to the urgency of now. Coaching is now known as one of the most powerful vehicles for personal transformation. In addition to that, there's real growing evidence that it can also be a powerful vehicle for social change. So when we think about ICF, which is the International Coach Federation, one of the things that ICF states very clearly is that coaches and coaching make communities, workplaces, and we would add the world, a better place. Coaching is the second fastest growth industry after technology. That really surprised me, but that's true. Again, coming back to ICF, although we know that at this point in the history of coaching, 30 years of age, started in 1991, that it's probably the most unregulated of industries, and that's beginning to change. ICF have a set of ethical standards, and I was looking at that the other day to kind of give us some context. And some of those ethical standards relate to, first of all, avoiding discrimination in the coaching space, setting very firm, clear cultural boundaries. When we think about the Coactive Training Institute, one of the principles is that the client is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. But how do you actually deliver coaching that has deep impact? How do we know whether our coaching is on that kind of border of stereotyping the client that's sitting in the seat? What assumptions might we be making? How do we regulate that? What does an exceptional, high-impact coach look like in today's world? What does it mean to be a transformative coach and create real, deep, meaningful change? What's required to really have deep social impact? Because I think that kind of when we think about 2020, the world needs a very different response. So what does it need? What will it take to have that deep social impact to address the divided and the polarized world that I think we all know that we're in? So our purpose is to commit to building a global tribe of borderless coaches who are able to respond to what I think Keith Grint calls the wicked problem of today. So whether that's Black Lives Matter, COVID-19 and the disproportionate impact that that's had on ethnic minority communities, whether that's issues of furloughing and poverty and redundancy and the global recession that we are experiencing. We call this the triple pandemic. Today we're going to start to answer that question around what does it take to be a powerful coach that leaves a meaningful legacy of connectedness and not division in the world we're in today. So I want to start by kind of trying to answer that question in terms of why do we need a different response to coaching, who we need to be differently than we are today, what's missing the presence of which would make a fundamental difference. We're also going to be asking, so how do we coach in the diversity space? Does race really matter? And how do we navigate that as coaches in service of our clients? So we want this to be interactive, engaging. I'm hoping that all of you will, a majority of you have a real interest and passion. We've looked at why you want to be here. So we're asking for a couple of things: that you're intentional and fully present. We're going to go through the next 75 minutes, so there will be no break. So take what you need to make sure that you are sitting comfortably. Please use the chat function for chatting to each other and creating connection, but also in terms of the questions, use the Q&A function that is located on Zoom. We're also going to be recording today's session as well. Well, I believe in the Ubuntu principle. I am, because we are, so I never, ever, ever travel alone. So I'd like to introduce you to some phenomenal coaches that will be helping us to have this important conversation. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Laurie Shook from Shook Svensson Limited. Laurie has been a professional coach since 1997. She is a master certified coach. So in our tribe, she is the guru since 2001. Laurie has coached business owners, managers, and executives around the world, was instrumental in bringing the Coactive Training Institute to Europe. She's worked with leaders in large multinationals, mid-sized companies. She's also making the latest research around neuroscience and adult learning theory. She served on faculty at the Coaches Training Institute, CR Global, and Performance Consultants International. So without much ado, Laurie, please switch on your camera so that everybody can see you and give a big wave. The next person I'd like to introduce you to is Paul Anthony, who is a senior consultant, borderless leadership coach at the Diversity Practice. So Paul works with me. Paul is an organizational development and leadership consultant, facilitator, and coach, and he has an overriding passion to serve, empower, and transform his clients' lives against all odds so that they grow and they fulfill their purpose-driven potential and maximize their authentic leadership. Paul has worked in the private sector, the public sector, including the NHS Leadership Academy, on various programs. He has a master's in international business, a PhD. He's also a qualified coactive coach and a certified NTL practitioner as well. So again, Paul, welcome to this big conversation about race in the coaching space. And finally, Andrew Bidnell. He's an executive coach, director of Inside Out Consulting. Andrew has designed and facilitated leadership programs, again, all over the world, from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, as well as North and South Africa. He also is very, very values-driven, has delivered pro bono coaching for the UN. Andrew is also certified by the PCC International Coach Federation, CPCC Coaches Training Institute. He also holds an MBA from Manchester Business School. As for me, I hope I'm all of that and more, but not really. I equally am a CTI coach. I also have an MBA from Strathclyde Business School. And as I said, it's my real pleasure to be in this space right now. So, Andrew, I believe it's over to you, because I think you're going to kick us off in a big way. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for those warm words. It's fantastic to be here, and I can see a number of participants joining, and hopefully that you are joining from all around the world. I will just reiterate what Carol was saying there. Use the chat to let us know where you're joining from, and it'd be fantastic to keep an eye on that as we go throughout today. But we want to start with a bit of a provocative question. Carol mentioned borderless coaching, and one of the principles behind borderless coaching and one of the skills that we explore together in borderless coaching is the art of provocative questions. So with many of you joining today being experienced qualified coaches, you'll be familiar with this idea of provocative questions. So I wanted just to highlight to you our directory of coaches and just start with a very simple question for you. You will see now a group of 6 of our coaches on your screen, and I would invite you to select one. Select a coach who you'd like to be coached with. And I'll just give you a second to think about that. Select a coach who's speaking to you, who you'd like to be coached by. Have a think about that. And as you think about your selection, just notice, who are you picking? And who are you avoiding? How are you feeling about your choice of coach? What's leaning you in that particular direction? What's the story you're telling yourself about that particular coach? What's the story you're telling yourself about the other coaches? Are you making any assumptions? And what's it telling you about race in the coaching space? Is it telling you anything about race in the coaching space? You might want to share some of your reflections to some of those questions and some of your assumptions, some of your reflections in the chat as we go through. And a final question, if we'd shared these pictures with you just a year ago, would your response have been the same? Just notice your responses as we kick off today. Notice the assumptions, notice your choices, what you're stepping into, what you're stepping away from. And we will come back to that as we go throughout this session. Thank you. Paul. Although, Paul, you might need to just turn your mute off so we can hear you.
That's always helpful.
Perfect.
Yeah. You may notice one of Andrew's last questions was that question about, would your choice have been any different a year ago? And it's clear that there has been a lot that has happened in the last year, indeed, in the last, since the start of this year. And that is the context for this webinar, yeah? It is a context of the triple pandemic that you've heard Carol describe. A triple pandemic that started with COVID-19 and lockdown for us, no matter where we were in the world. And what emerged through that experience and is still relevant today is the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 had and continues to have on Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse groups of people, both in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere. And this was really the first flag, I would say, in this year of race taking a more prominent position in people's consciousness. We then had the economic consequences of that lockdown. Yeah, the economic consequence, the recession that some of us entered into, and indeed the economic dislocation at a minimum that we've all experienced. And again, what became clear was the disproportionate impact that this was having on Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse groups. This was followed this year by the murder of George Floyd, that senseless, wanton act that so many people around the world saw. And on the back of that, the re-emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, the re-emergence of Black Lives Matter, and a sense, I think somebody coined the phrase, of a great awakening taking place around systemic racism. Although for me, I must admit, it wasn't so much of an awakening as it was something that I have lived with all of my life. But apparently for millions of people around the world, they never knew it existed until the murder of George Floyd. And what we've also seen in the world this year is an increasingly deeply polarized world between those seeking to retain the status quo and those seeking change to create a more socially and economically just and equal society. With the world experiencing racism in a more prominent form than maybe any time in recent history, that experience permeates the coaching space as well. Race matters in the coaching space. And a couple of examples that have been reported to me. A couple of examples. The first one is of a Black woman who had a female coach, white female coach. The client, the Black woman, had suffered from COVID and indeed had become quite traumatized in the early months of COVID, not just because of her own illness through COVID, which gratefully passed, but also because she carried the weight of knowing that other Black individuals were being more impacted by COVID. She carried that weight of always having to consider how she needed to be different, act different, show up different in her everyday life because of COVID. The murder of George Floyd then just added to that sense of trauma. Yeah, George could have been her brother, could have been her father, an uncle, or indeed could even have been her. The result of all of this was that she took some time off work and turned to a coach for some support. And yet, she never really experienced any real empathy for her situation. Her coach just never got it. And indeed, to paraphrase what came back to me, the coach at one point literally said, "I don't understand why you're traumatized. It's not as if you knew George, was it?" And here's another example of race in the coaching space that came to my attention, of a white coach coaching a white manager. And that manager managed a racially diverse team. And the focus of their coaching sessions was about leadership and leadership performance and how to increase the leadership impact that this manager was having. And yet, throughout this experience of the triple pandemic, at no point in their coaching sessions was race actually discussed. Why would it be discussed? A white coach with a white manager. Not once did they explore his leadership response to the impact of the murder of George Floyd and the re-emergence of Black Lives Matter. Not once did they discuss the impact of that on him, or indeed on the team that he led, made up of Black and Asian members. Not once did this manager sit down with any of his Black staff and ask them, how are you doing? What impact has this had on you? So does race matter in the coaching space? Yes, it does. I'm now going to hand the mic, so to speak, back to Andrew, so that he can share with us some of his recent experiences, both on a personal level and on a professional level.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. It's fantastic to see some of these comments coming in over the into the chat, and I would urge you to keep an eye on those as we continue to have this conversation. The assumptions that we make about people based on their, based on their race, based on that quick snapshot of a picture, and also the learning that we can take for ourselves from that too. One of the questions that Paul and Carol asked me to explore here was, what's the impact of this triple pandemic on me as an individual and also on me as a coach? And it's quite a challenging question. So I'm born in the UK. I've lived quite a lot internationally. I live in a multicultural family. I've lived abroad quite a lot, and I work quite a lot internationally. So it feels to me a lot of the time that I am very open to difference. I am conscious of different races, different cultures, different ages, etc., etc. And yet when I think about my response to this triple pandemic, and particularly the Black Lives Matter movement and that increasing kind of coverage that we see on our screens, as a white guy, I've gone through a whole load of emotions, emotions of guilt, emotions of shame, emotions of defensiveness. It wouldn't be me. I wouldn't do that. It's not about me. Emotions of anger, emotions of frustration, also emotions of inspiration from conversations I'm having with people, and motivation to want to do something about this, which is partly what brings me onto this call. And part of the learnings I have is around, I need to educate myself a lot better and build my awareness of what is really going on around me. But there is a limit to how many Harvard implicit bias tests that I should be taking, or articles I should be reading, or podcasts I can be learning from. It feels to me that that's the easy part in terms of building my awareness. But that's the kind of, right, I'm taking that information in and I'm reflecting, but what am I really doing with that information? I quite like Kotter's model of change, which many of you will be familiar with, the kind of see, feel, change model of change, as opposed to just thinking and analyzing and then changing. And I noticed that I can see things and learn things and be aware of things, but am I really feeling it? And when I'm really feeling it, that is what's making me want to change. I used to coach kids football, and I like the sporting analogy of being a spectator in the stands, or being a player on the pitch, or being part of the coaching team that's right next to the pitch. Being a spectator from the stands, we can critique. We can say, I would have done this. He should have done that. I would never have done that. And it's easy to be that spectator. Far harder to be that player on the pitch. And sometimes when I think and reflect on my coaching and my community involvement, so I think, I'm guilty of being that spectator often, and seeing and listening, observing, being a kind of a bystander, but not really making things happen on the pitch, partly because of fear of getting things wrong, saying the wrong thing, fear of causing offense, fear of discomfort, and not fully opening up into that option. And so in my coaching practice, after getting to know Carol and Paul and listening to their experiences, it's challenging me to really consider what I mean by valuing difference. Valuing difference is a principle that I would have bought into many, many years ago. But am I really valuing difference? And am I using difference as part of my coaching conversations? I coach a very senior leader, African lady, incredibly inspirational lady, who's very influential in her organization. And yet it took me a long, long time to even bring up the difference that here was I, a white British coach, and there she is, African lady. And we're not having that conversation about race. I didn't use myself as an instrument as part of that coaching, which would have and now is beginning to help a lot more. I love coaching internationally, but I've avoided bringing that kind of race and worrying about the terminology that I'm using into the room. And so I think, one of my learnings that Paul and as Paul and Carol challenged me, one of my learnings is to embrace discomfort a lot more, be far more curious about what is going on with race and other differences, and really value that difference. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go throughout this conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. And, just building on what you've described, I found, for me, particularly the murder of George Floyd, it was as if I was going through the grief cycle, from that state of numbness and denial through anger and a real sense of loss, and a recognition that George could have been me. Yeah. Indeed, George could have been any one of hundreds of Black men and women that have been murdered by the police or other security forces in the US, in the UK, in Brazil, in France, and elsewhere in the world. That's why you hear us describe systemic racism as a pandemic, because it's not something unique just to the UK or to the US. It's a global phenomenon. And the experience for me led me to even question myself as a coach. Here I am, I'm relatively well experienced in the diversity and inclusion space, doing leadership development and executive coaching, seeking change. And yet I had to ask myself the question, to what extent had I been colluding with the system? Yeah. To what extent had I colluded with the system? And it also reconfirmed to me that as a coach, you can't be fully present and fully connected with your clients where there's difference in the space, any kind of difference, but particularly a racial difference. If we haven't crossed our own borders and done the work on ourselves to look at our own prejudices and biases and limiting beliefs and our own privileges. And it led me to think about how many of us as coaches have done that work on self before we go out to coach others. It also led me to kind of redouble in a more intentional way my own approach to coaching and to borderless coaching. Recognizing some of what you said, Andrew, to more intentionally look to unlock the values, the strengths, the power that comes through difference, through diversity, and through race in particular, whether that be with my Black clients or with my white clients. Yeah, it led me to, when I was doing my process coaching work, to be more intentional and explicit in trying to use provocative, powerful questions to bring out the trauma that some had, or indeed, many like yourself who may have experienced the guilt. Yeah, it's led me to, to try and hold my clients in that space where I'm encouraging them to embrace that discomfort that comes whenever race and racism becomes the topic of conversation. But it's also led me to recognize, even in coaching, in our coaching world, the urgency of now, that now is the time that we need to do things differently, to bring change, and to recognize that I can do two things at the same time. Yeah, I can enhance the leadership performance of the leaders that I coach, but while simultaneously changing the system and eliminating systemic racism, one conversation at a time. The how we as a group of coaches do that, how we develop those deeper, more holistic and identity-based relationships across race in the coaching space is something that Carol and Laurie are now actually going to demonstrate for us in a live case study of their own coaching relationship. So thank you, and let me introduce you back to Carol and to Laurie.
Here we are, back in this conversation. So I'm hoping that that everyone can see us. Yeah, I think I can see you now, Laurie. I couldn't before. So I was just reflecting on what both Paul and Andrew, shared, and I think it's, we designed this session, didn't we? So we would have a Black man, a white man, a Black woman, a white woman. And clearly those are not the only dimensions of race, but it gives us some really good grounding to have a meaningful conversation. And so, Paul talked about provocative questions and process, and, the extent Andrew talked about, the kind of challenge and the difficulty, feeling uncomfortable with his, African female client to even bring the subject of race, and yet she's navigating her spaces as a Black woman, in an organization that's pretty multinational. So it kind of brings us to us, doesn't it? In a great way. And so I'm remembering the first time that I met you, Laurie. I met you when Karen Kinsey House came to London, and she was doing a session. And I was a real big fan of CTI, that, I'd grown in myself and my coaching practice through CTI. And I'd actually heard about you through one of my coaches, who was Milne. And I'd heard about Laurie Shook had brought CTI to London. And we had a conversation, and something just clicked, and it kind of really felt right. And, we continued to communicate. I actually looked at I was looking at some old emails. I mean, you know, we've been on this journey for over 6 years now, much younger. Anyway, and so I remember we started to have conversations with Caroline Harper Jantua, who was with, you know, running business, the diversity practice with me at the time. And it was all about, look, we need to bring inclusive coaching to the coaching world because it just does not exist. And we tried really hard and it fell on deaf ears. I think that's kind of what we're experiencing. Nobody had the awakening. And I also then kind of felt I needed a coach at the time. And so I reached out to you, and I put all my own biases to one side because I knew as a diversity and inclusion practitioner that I had many. And one of them was around white women. I had very few really positive experiences with white women in the world of work, but there was something about you that I kind of felt was different and was willing to try. How did you feel?
Well, I remember when we met, so that was just going back there for a moment. There was such connection at that Karen McKenzie House event that you were talking about. And that was longer ago than 6 years. That must have been 2007 or something, or 2008, 2009. I don't know. It was some time ago because I was, anyway, there was this instant connection and it felt like strength in our relationship, even though I didn't know what that was. And I felt like, what a privilege I have this connection with you, this powerful Black woman. And I just thought you were amazing. And then when you asked me to be your coach, I was sort of astounded and proud and excited and probably nervous. I don't remember exactly. And I was going to do what I do as a coach and coach you in the way I coach, being as colorblind as I could be, of course, because that's what I was trained to be. Being brought up as a white person in Southern California. That's implicit. I don't even remember any explicit training, like don't treat all these people the same. It was just built in. Yeah. So I was just pleased to be with you as a unique individual, but I don't remember anything. We didn't do anything.
No. So I guess, you know, and I'm remembering that I was really conscious. I was conscious of two things. I was conscious of being in this body, and being who I am. I was kind of also equally conscious of your power. I kind of, you know, here you are, CTI, and kind of and all of that. Lots of things are playing out. And yet I didn't feel I had the kind of courage in that moment to even inquire. So how would you coach me? I also have a faith, which is really, really important. And so that didn't happen. And then I bumped into a real challenge. And this, you know, you and I have spoken about this. And that challenge, I was working for the NHS Leadership Academy at the time. And I experienced, as part of the faculty, with one person in particular, who shall remain nameless, I experienced, you know, so from microaggressions to exclusion, to outright discrimination, to being micromanaged, and almost, you know, this person telling me that whenever I facilitate, I make strange noises. And I remember we had that conversation about this person, and we didn't go there, right? We just did not go there. We had the conversation, and I still walked away with the issue and the challenge. And it's not that the coaching, because you're an amazing coach, you know how much I value and respect you, but there was part of me that just didn't enter that conversation. And I think not too soon after that, you know, I kind of, our coaching relationship paused. I mean, were you aware of that, at the time? What's your reflection?
Well, one word, clueless. It's, and I go to that guilt, shame place of why didn't I do something like, I also didn't know how, and I trusted you and your diversity work, but that's not fair. And so there's, as I listen to you, as we've talked about it recently, I can go into a whole shame place about that.
Yeah.
And I know that's not hopeful, but clueless, yeah. You know, I vaguely remember the conversation. My memory's not great, but I vaguely remember that conversation. And it didn't occur to me to ask, is this a race issue? Is there some way that as a white woman, I can, you know, we can do something with our differences to help you look at that or work through it or something? And I would still want to learn, actually, how we could do that better.
And I also remember in that conversation that I didn't really feel that I could fully trust you with the issue.
Yeah, I get it.
Right. I did not feel that. And when we think about how important it is, you know, to design our alliance, and going back to, you know, what I said earlier on about, you know, as the client is naturally kind of creative, resourceful, whole, and the client is uniquely different.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that kind of, you know, again, spurred us on to think about diversity in the coaching space, race in the coaching space. How are coaches, in terms of kind of full integrity and given the calling that coaches have as that powerful bridge, realizing the full potential of their clients, you know, regardless of whether you're a business coach, a life coach, a leadership coach, that's what you're in. It's all about transformation and change. And yet there's this whole part, which is, you can coach me around behaviors and my performance. I'm seeing so much of that right now on social media. You know, want to accelerate, want to 10 max your coaching, accelerate your coaching, be highly impactful, 5 key steps to, and nothing about identity. You know, it's only more recently that we know, whether it's ICF or, you know, all of the kind of coaching bodies are saying, we support Black Lives Matter. My question is, so where was that before? And you know, one of the things I think that, you know, that we both know is, and for me as a client, you know, I wanted to be seen, understood, really deeply valued. And I know that those are, you know, those are your values too. But that's what really kind of was a real catalyst for, there's something else, there's something missing here. That's the whole concept, methodology, framework that was borderless coaching. But then what's interesting was that maybe about, I don't know, maybe about 8 months ago now, we hooked up again, and it's really important for me to have a coach. And I asked you, and I asked you because I could see that things were changing. There was a new, deeper understanding that you developed. And equally, because I'd been on the journey of, you know, what a borderless coach looks like, what coaching in the diversity space is, I knew what to ask for in terms of designing our alliance. You know, it was all about me bringing my full authenticity to the table. It was equally about you as a coach, bringing your full authenticity. It was about us sharing, using, you know, to like the landscape of me. So Carol, what are the things that are important to you? I could say my faith. You could say, okay, I could say my race. And even then, you know, we're still learning. What are some of the things that you've learned from our new journey?
From our new journey, yeah. Well, I've just being able to speak to differences, and that it's okay. I think that sounds really silly, but that it's okay to speak to differences. Even for me to say, Carol, you're a Black woman and I'm a white woman. Wow, yeah. It may sound absolutely ridiculous, but those words were hard for me to say before.
Yeah. And I guess I'm kind of reflecting on one of my most powerful moments. You know, when you're becoming a coach, you're in this hot seat. And so I took a hot seat moment, you know, when I was doing CTI, and that would have been about 14 years ago now. And I remember being coached by a white South African man. And I don't know what it was about. It was one of my most tentative, vulnerable, bringing up young boys or my sons, or there was something going on in my life. And I kind of just couldn't even find the words to describe it. And he looked at me and he said, you know, and in a very respectful way, he said, you know, you're a strong Black woman. Why are you sitting on your greatness? And in that moment, he identified I mean, he's the only one who ever did. He identified and tapped into a part of me that Right, yeah, it was integral to me. And I'm not using, and he didn't use the stereotype. And I know, you know, when we talk about borderless, there are all kinds of words that are stereotypical, you know, but he didn't, you know, he didn't use it in that way. So if you were to think about, I don't know, maybe 3 things that we could share that we've learned from, you know, from this new exciting journey that, you know, that we're on, because now you're, you know, we're both faculty in terms of small faculty in terms of borderless coaching. You know, what would those 3 things be for you?
I think permission to talk about things that feel that are coming out of me, that like, okay, it's okay to talk about differences. So permission is the word I put.
Yeah. But that's a must.
That's a must. Yes.
Yeah.
And it feels new and shaky to me because I'm new at that and still learning and growing, and so excited to be learning and growing more on that. So permission is one. Gosh, that covers a lot. I'm not sure about the other 2.
Okay. For me, I think one of the things that I've learned in our relationship is that, and in every coaching relationship, the dynamics of difference are always in the coaching space.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know, you could be coaching someone that's called Laurie with a slightly different surname, you know, born in the same place that you were, same age, and it might be works out preference. There's always difference. How are we navigating that?
Yeah.
Right. And I think the other thing that I've learned is that, you know, when we talk about having impact, that impact can be so much richer and so much deeper and so much more meaningful for yourself as a coach and for the client if you are speaking to identity in a skillful way. I don't think that it's not enough to, well, either I don't see race or I'm not racist. You know, we now know that that's not enough. You have to be anti-racist, and even in, you know, even in the coaching space, and how you can use the dynamics of difference in a real powerful way. The other thing I'm really convinced of is that, you know, if not us, who? If not now, when? This is a moment. Yeah. This is a moment in history. And if coaches are really going to be, you know, effective, then we must have an impact in terms of social change. So thank you.
Thank you.
That was a good kind of time of reflection, wasn't it?
It was. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that about you, that we can reflect and talk about differences. And I am learning so much and starting to build a little bit of a comfort zone around that. And I just appreciate that so much. And I hope that I can be on a journey with a lot of others who are doing the same.
Absolutely. That's our ambition. That's this global tribe. And so I think we now are going to give everyone the opportunity to respond to some questions. And then also, you can absolutely begin to put in the Q&A the questions that you have for us. Also, just to say that although we finish at about 5:15, we'll be hanging around a little bit longer if you want to hear or you've got any further questions. So Andrew, over to you. We're switching off our videos and turning off our mics.
I'm going to jump in with my air traffic control headphones on. It's fantastic to see the comments coming through. Please pop your questions into the Q&A. Lots of reflections in the chat too, and I would encourage you all to look through those. A lot of appreciation, Carol and Laurie, for the fearless, powerful conversation that you're having there. Lots of appreciation coming in there. But before we move to questions, which we can then open up into a discussion, we wanted to ask questions for us all. And with the magic of Zoom that we are all becoming so familiar with, we wanted to use the poll function so that you can ask yourself a question, and then we'll be able to see where we as a group today, we've got 167 people on right now. So where are we sitting with some of these questions? So Barbara is going to share a poll, which should appear on your screen at some point now. So the first question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, you know, bearing in mind all your experience, everything you're bringing into this call, also some of the reflections from what you've heard, to what extent would you say diversity is a fundamental pillar in your coaching practice? So on a scale of 1 to 5, to what extent is diversity a fundamental pillar in your coaching practice? And you can vote 1 to 5. And let's see where we come out with that as a group. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. You just press submit for those of you who are new to the polls, and then you will see the results that come through. So I'll just give you a few moments to put, hopefully all the polls share. So occasionally, depending on which browser you're joining, these polls don't work, but feel free to pop it into the chat as well, your score, if you haven't seen the poll. So let's close that poll, Barbara, and maybe you could share the results so we can see our responses to poll number 1. So Fund 43, nearly half of us are saying it's fundamental in our coaching practice. But we've got to spread across the others, so it's not at all. 9%, 27% in the middle, 18%, and 43% are saying it's fundamental. Interesting to reflect on what that means for you, what that looks like, how you promote that, how you bring that, the work you do around that. Let's go to question number 2, if we can, Barbara. There's 3 questions. Don't worry, not too many. And Liz, I just noticed something you popped into the chat there, Liz. 2020 has really shifted your perspective. Just wanted to highlight that particular comment when we are looking at these polls too. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how competent do you feel you are in leveraging the power of diversity in the coaching space? How competent do you feel you are in leveraging the power of diversity in the coaching space? From 1 to 5. So 5, fully leverage it, use that power of diversity a lot to its fullest extent. 1, not at all. Just maybe give the vote there, and then we will see what the results come up. Diversity in its widest sense. Nathan Charles, good to see you on the call, Nathan. Diversity is the cornerstone of my coaching practice. Fantastic. Let's see the results from that poll, if we can, please. Okay. So interestingly, the biggest scoring indicator there, nearly half of us, 45% of us, are saying that we're kind of somewhere in the middle. We've got 17% of us, 1 or 2, not there, not competent, not feeling competent. Fully leveraged, 10% of us, and moving up to that 28%. So how competent are? So a question that comes around that is, what can we all do to develop our competencies around that, to deepen our understanding, to practice, etc., get the feedback. Okay, let's try question number 3. Question number 3, final question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable would you say you are in working with race in the coaching space? So the title of this webinar, Race in the Coaching Space. On a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable do you feel you are in working with race in the coaching space? And let's see what pops up there. So 1, not at all, through to 5, totally comfortable. And some comments relating to that coming into that chat too. Thank you. So I'll give you just a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see the results from question number 3. Okay, totally comfortable, 31. Just number 4, 34%. Quite significant, 34, 35%, either 1, 2, or 3. So how comfortable are you working with race in the coach? So broad, I think at all of those polls, we had at least 1 response across for each particular option. So interesting to reflect on what that might mean for you in your coaching. So our intention now is to move to a far more open Q&A. If I can ask Paul, Carol, Laurie to pop your cameras on so that we can see everybody. And there are a number of questions and comments coming through. So my job here, ladies and gentlemen, is to try and keep an eye on some of the questions and share those through, and then we'll see what comes through. So let's just jump in, Carol, Laurie. This is where we go free form, okay? And nobody knows what's going to happen, yeah?
There we go.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to go straight in with Vila's question. It's such a powerful conversation. Thank you. What I am curious to hear the panel's thoughts on is 2 things. So firstly, if you have experimented with bringing an intersectionality framework of race and socioeconomic status to coaching interventions, and if so, how has this changed the dynamic in your experience? And the second question as part of that, if they feel the use of psychometric and facilitative behaviors tools in multicultural coaching relationships are helpful, and if you feel they are, then how? So I'll pose those questions. Who wants to jump in?
So do you want me to have a go, Laurie?
Please.
Okay. So I would say when I kind of think about my coaching practice, you know, I probably focus on intersectionality. You know, I have done quite a lot of research in that space. And so in terms of coaching, I don't just see race. I see the combination of race, gender, socioeconomic status, culture, you know, ethnicity, faith, and I'm able to, well, certainly have extended my practice to take all of those things into consideration and the connection, the interconnection between those different dimensions of diversity. We know that in terms of intersectionality, when it comes to, you know, when it comes to different women, Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse women, as an example of that, the experiences that they have, you know, in the workplace, be that around, you know, experiencing double disadvantage, experiencing multiple forms of, you know, oppression, are very, very real. And so they're navigating those workplaces in a distinct way. And so it's really important for me as a coach to recognize that and to see that. And that would equally apply to, you know, me coaching in professional services, a Muslim man from northern Nigeria, whose cultural heritage is defined in a particular way, and drawing on that cultural heritage, understanding it enough to be able to help navigate that path. So, Laurie, do you want to kind of pick up on the, I think it was the psychometric tests and tools. Was that the question?
Yeah, if you feel the use of psychometric and facilitative behavioral tools in multicultural coaching relationships are helpful.
Well, I'm going to use that word clueless again. I feel very clueless about that. I haven't used them. I'm new on this journey. So I still feel new on this journey, and I want to be using more of the borderless tools that you have to be able to assess and bring to light differences.
I think one of the things about psychometric tests, you know, I always ask in tools is, who are the originators of those tools and those psychometric tests? Because, you know, again, they will be potentially, and I, you know, we do use some of them. So, you know, so for example, there's some tools that we do use pretty extensively, but we always have to provide a particular layer and perspective onto them from that perspective of difference, and to what extent that has been considered. Paul, did you want to add anything? Oh, sorry, Laurie. Sorry.
I do want to add something, because I've generally been averse to tools for any particular reason in coaching, just to sort of create from what's there. And when I think about in the past few years, when I have asked about differences between myself and the client that I have, I feel like they've said, oh, don't worry about it. Somebody just recently said, you know, I'm a Middle Eastern woman. So we've got differences. How might we use that? She goes, oh, no, I'm international. I really use it. And it felt like she was being put in a corner and closet or something, you know? And she was the one who kind of said, no, let's not. And I got a little lost there, not knowing what to do. But I think a psychometric might help and say, here are these differences, and here's how we might be able to work with them. And that would be a help for me to help highlight those differences, if that makes sense, rather than just try to draw them out when I'm still trying to find my way of how to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question, Laurie, this is for you. There's a couple. I'm going to wrap two up in one here, okay? So I'd like to ask Laurie why she feels speaking out loud the words Black woman has been so difficult. And building on that, well done, Laurie, for being so open and honest in your reflections. What would you say to other white people who are finding it really hard to refrain from being defensive and to be as open and vulnerable as you've been You know, lots of white people appear to glaze over and become defensive when the term white privilege is mentioned.
Sure, I think those are all connected. Being able to say black woman, black man, I don't know why that's been so difficult. It was just not allowed in my upbringing. We just didn't name differences. So it was just an unfamiliar place, like using a new and different language. So quite unfamiliar. And as for working, advice I would have for other white coaches, invest in anti-racism work. I've been with a group, and several of my anti-racism fellow journeyers are on this webinar. Thanks, guys, for being here. We've learned a lot about white privilege. We've learned a lot what it is, what it means, all the white fragility, all that, a bunch of different terms that, you know, we could struggle with and all of that. But understanding that is huge, I think. Just like really understanding where do we come from and what has been bred into us as members of the prevailing race, which isn't really a real concept, we know. You know, the majority, how do, you know, what's been, you know, we've been brainwashed in a way, like we are the, you know, white centric. This is a white world, and, you know, in the US where I'm from, in the UK, and this is the white world, and others are different, and we don't speak to the differences, you know. So we've got to invest in looking at, you know, how have we learned all that stuff, and what can we do about it? Sorry.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Laurie, you know, this is one of the questions that that we actually ask in a lot of the leadership work that we do. You know, what in terms of your sense of identity. And we do find consistently that white men in particular really struggle to identify as being white men, to talk about themselves from that perspective. And there's an element of that, as you said, that is just about when I'm in the majority, I don't recognize being white because it's the norm. Yes, everybody's white and everybody else is different. So I don't need to look at myself in that way. Sometimes what we hear back is that, well, I can't talk about being white because if I talk about white, I might get labeled in a particular way, or I might come across as though I'm being superior, even though I'm not trying to be superior in talking about it. Yeah, and other such, you know, defensive arguments are put across. And the point I always make back is that, so if you can't talk about being white, how are we ever going to change things? Because if we can't have a conversation where we are talking about race, and I'm able to express what my experiences have been as a black man, and you cannot express your experiences as a white man, how do we come together? Yeah. How do we find that common ground? And so it's actually essential to create the change that we'd like to see. It's essential that we can have conversations where we're explicitly looking at those aspects of our identity.
And I kind of I'd add to that, like how can you coach? How can you sit in that chair as coach with a client who is racially different to you? How can that work? What is the extent of the impact that you can have? And imagine if you really did own your identity, you know, as a white man or a white woman, and the reverse might be the case. You know, the huge impact that might have.
That leads nicely, I think, Carol, if I can stay with you, a question from Molly. What are the core competencies or commitments of borderless coaches? What does it mean to be part of this tribe?
In my head, I'm thinking, you know, it means everything. I think in terms of being a borderless coach, and, you know, we will say more about this in our next webinar, just putting it right in there, because this is the beginning of a journey that hopefully you will be joining us on. One of the key things is that borderless is all about starting with self and doing your own work, right? Doing that deep work that I think that, you know, as coaches, I know we all went through a particular program, but did we really sit with who we are and really look deeply in the mirror when it comes to the dynamics of difference, what might be in the space, how you navigate that, being fully authentic, your own biases, what shape and form do they take? How do you navigate that with integrity, and so on and so forth. So there's something about really owning your stuff and working through that. And moving on from that to, so what personal impact do you want to have in the world? What personal impact do you want to have with your clients? How do you kind of create, you talked about whether it's through the provocative questions or being respectfully curious, or really having that kind of cultural synergy where you're using your cultural competence. I don't want to use jargon, but enough of your client to be able to understand their experiences and work with that in a powerful way. And so those are just some of the ways of being and some of the must-have. And I think the third thing about Borderless Coaches is that it's all about now. It's all about responding to the urgency of now, and not, putting mission as a foundation before money, right? So that's really critical. So if you want to be part of social change, and then that's what Borderless is about. And just again, in terms of our hashtag, we've got a Facebook group called Coaches for Change. So those are kind of 3 areas, I would think.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, Geraldine asked a great question here. Carol, Paul, what reactions have you had when you introduce your difference to white coachees? Have you ever had a negative reaction? E.g., what's that got to do with me?
So one of the reasons that I didn't talk about, because I think I'm on a roll. I love being on a roll. I'll stop soon, I promise you. But one of the things I do remember is very large Magic Circle law firm that I went through the hoops to get onto the coaching register for. And one of the reasons we kind of did that picture exercise was because, having got onto their coaching bench, their employees were asked to choose a coach, and really it was just pictures and a short bio. I kind of think I'm okay in what I do as a coach. I was never, ever, ever chosen. Right? And we kind of consequently know what was in that water. I think also because of experience as a Borderless coach and really being deeply invested in that, I bring that to coaching my white clients, who come back to me time and time again. I just, directing it in the NHS, having coached her 6 years ago, found her way right back to being coached by me, because again, it was about seeing her for who she is. Very senior woman in a very senior level. I think there were only 2 or 3 other white women on the board with her, struggling around her identity, and so able to go there with her. So that's, working with those dynamics has been really powerful in a good way, and powerful in a kind of negative way too.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, what I would add to that is, in terms of reactions when I introduce difference into the, to white coaches, I don't have to introduce it. The moment they see me, difference is there. Yeah? So I don't need to speak it. It's there. It's in the space from the moment we connect, the moment they actually see me. And yes, have I ever had a negative reaction of what's this got to do with me? Oh yes, lots of times. Yeah, lots of times. Because as we were saying earlier, if you've grown up in a majority context, you don't necessarily see your whiteness, or indeed, if you've grown up in a majority Black context, you don't necessarily see your Blackness. Yeah, and so I guess underlying your question is, how do we respond to that? Well, one of the things we do, we persevere. Yeah, we persevere. We create that space where they feel comfortable in embracing the discomfort of having a conversation that is focused on race. I might in a casual aside say to them, to try and lighten any tension that might be there, Imagine if I put you on a plane and sent you to Murtala Mohammed Airport in Lagos, Nigeria. I can guarantee you, as a white man or as a white woman, within a few moments, you will start to recognize your whiteness because you will be surrounded by blackness. Yeah. And that just then gives me space to then build on that and enter into a conversation as to what that means. And the second thing is, as with all coaches, we're trying to understand what it is that's driving our clients, what's driving them. And so how do we connect with them? And, I guess because I coach a lot of people that are in that leadership space, most of them want to become better leaders. They want to be better at what they do. And so if they want to be better at what they do, how can the only way you can become better is where you have a diverse team or a diverse set of clients or a diverse market that you're serving, is to start to explore the differences that are in that space. And inevitably that takes us into a conversation about race.
Yeah. And I think everything is data, as a borderless coach, everything is data. And we talk about drafting. And so one of the things that we certainly learned to do is to notice, is to observe, come to the edge and step into that zone of uncomfortable discovery and not step over it's got nothing to do with me, but be curious, respectfully curious about that. And also we bring ourselves, using self as an instrument of change is a powerful principle for us. So we bring ourselves with permission into that relationship.
Thank you, Carol. Just building on that. So anonymous attendee, lots of the coaching practices and supporting research that I'm aware of are American or European. Maybe this is a good question for you, Laurie. Where else and what else would help me as a borderless coach? Any thoughts on that in terms of coaching practices and supporting research outside of America or Europe?
That's a great question. I am also aware that most of the coaching research is in the US and Europe. So, I know there's lots of coaching going on a lot of places. I've been in South Africa, and I know there's a lot happening in South Africa, and I'm sure in other African countries, but I'm not as aware. The South African folks have been really trying to reach out to other African countries and building coaching networks. I don't know about research that's coming from there, but I sure want to see it when it is.
I think that's, again, that's one of the things that, that we're trying to do, is in recognizing that there is this gap. We are pulling on, Asian frameworks for leadership and coaching, African frameworks for leadership and coaching, all the other cultural frameworks as well. And that's, in terms of thought leadership, that's what we are drawing on to build this methodology and this framework that is borderless, so that it's robust. And so we say global and globally relevant, it really is relevant in that, in that sense. And that's why you as a tribe are important, as we begin to build this out and to, to bring this into your space. Any thoughts, considerations that you have, please kind of keep them coming, and looking forward to you being part of our Facebook group as we build this tribe too.
I'm conscious in the chat there's lots of expertise in different areas, and you're sharing that in the chat. So keep that coming. Fantastic. Maybe there's loads of questions. So which is fantastic. I'm going to hit one more, and then I'm conscious of that kind of time scale was to finish at 5:15. But I think we're open for staying on and answering a few more questions as we go through. But let's maybe finish with Ellie's question here before I hand over to you, Carol, in terms of next steps and what can happen next. So Ellie's got a point here. I generally find that people drastically underestimate the depth of personal work needed when they ask me to coach them around diversity and inclusion, be this for their own personal development, because of an experience of discrimination, or because they want to change their organization. So that leads to frustration when they don't get a quick win. How do you work through this phase of coaching with clients? What a great question.
Yeah, that is a That's a really good question. One of the other principles, when we think about borderless coaching, it might seem like a simple word, but I think, Paul, you referred to it earlier on, is about remembering that this is a finite journey. I mean, it's an endless journey that you
Infinite.
An infinite, sorry. Oh God, I knew that I'd get that wrong. It's an infinite journey. And, again, kind of coming back to owning your voice as a coach, knowing and being very clear with your client that this is a journey. There are no quick wins. If there were quick wins, we wouldn't be where we are today. One of the things that I often say in those situations around, what are the 3 books that I need to read? Whether or not, why am I no longer talking to white people about race? Well, I've read that. What else? What more? Our response as borderless coaches is the most important book you will ever read is yourself. Is you, and that does take time, and that does take patience. And I also think that, for me in the seat, certainly as a black woman and as a coach, there have been a few occasions where I've actually chosen to walk away from the, do it very quickly, quick fix, tick the box, because this is not what this is about. This is about transformative change. So really keeping a real focus on intention and mission is important in that sense. Hope that's been helpful.
Thank you very much. Some very appreciative comments coming into the chat, but I'm conscious of time. So Carol, can I hand over to you just to headline where this goes next and to draw things to a close? And then I'll ask the others to let's pop our screens off, but we can come back for some more questions if people would like to stay on for a bit longer. That's fine. Sure.
I'm kind of I'm sitting here and I'm feeling all fizzy. Fizzy is a good word. I've worked in the race space basically the whole of my career, and I've never felt such a pressing need for our community of coaches. I really haven't. As I said earlier on, the impact that we can have is huge, is significant. We are in a polarized, divided world. We are in a place where we've been locked down and locked away, a place where we've all been very, very reflective. It's what do we do with this moment? That's the question. I know that a lot of coaches are driven by money in our pocket, and that's not being compromised, but we are in danger of compromising something that is so much more important. I want to know that, in 50 years' time, maybe 100, I'm not here anymore. As a coach, was I on the right side of history? What was it that I did? Did I step into the arena and make things different? And so we are inviting you to be part of this tribe of borderless coaches. And borderless coaches are those that have the skills, the mindset, and the calling to confidently coach in the diversity space and be the change we so desperately need in this world today. So that's the big ambition. And I know, as I said, you're here not because, well, I just had to be, but because something brought you here. And that is about your purpose and also about your mission. So this, as I said, is the beginning of a path. And I know it's cliche, but it really is. But we've been on this path for some time. So it's not a new approach to coaching for us. It's very, very well evidenced. We've used this approach with hundreds of leaders, and we think it's now time to bring it to the world. We have another session on the 25th of November, 2020. So inviting you to be part of that conversation. And that's entitled A Taste of Borderless. So it's a Taste of Borderless on the 25th rather. Did I say the 28th? Oh, the 25th of November. please follow us, follow me on Twitter, follow us, follow our Facebook page as well. We've got Emma who is tweeting away. Please share the conversation that you had. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, what is the one thing, having been in this space, there's all, this question. So you've heard the what, so what? So you've been here for the past 75 minutes. So what? The next bit is now what? And that's what we're interested in knowing. So what is your now what? What is the one thing that you're taking away from this conversation that you're kind of committed to being and doing? So if you can just share that, that would be awesome. So let me see. Agreeing with me, that's great. Thank you for the really inspiring conversation. So just that one thing that you might be taking away, going away. Remember, this will be recorded. Please share it with your fellow coaches and your wider networks, because this tribe is real and this is the moment. So taking away hope, continuing my own personal deep work, great. That's coming from Christine. How am I going to have this more intentional conversation, says Nicola. Embracing my identity, Devinda. There's no other way. One thing I'm intentionally working on is race in everything that I do. The most important book you'll ever read, says Debbie, is yourself. Thank you for that. Being more intentional, says Janice. Being myself, having my voice heard, says Janet Brown. Thank you very, very much indeed. So I'm conscious, I'm 2 minutes over. For those of you that have to leave, thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you again on the 25th of November. For those of you who want to hang around for another 10, 15 minutes and ask us more questions, please do. For now, God bless, and the webinar is officially over.
Right, I'm going to jump back on now. This is like behind the scenes moment.
Yeah,
it's like
I know.
The after party. So if you want to stay for the after party, everybody, then there's plenty more questions to be working through. So Laurie and Paul will join me. But if you need to go, then don't feel obliged to stay. I just want to try and ping through a few of these questions, Carol, if we can, and Laurie. And so here's one from Beatrice. Can you give us an example of how you would design an alliance when it comes to naming difference in the coaching space?
Oh yeah, that's so we have a tool called the Landscape of Me, and in that, we kind of use that tool, send it to our client in advance, and it asks everything from remember that time when you were born. So that allows us to talk to age. We ask questions around sexual orientation. Do you believe in God? Do you have a faith? We ask questions around disability, ability. We talk about work style preference. So there are many different ways. It's quite a comprehensive process, but it allows us to go to those places that the traditional, if you like those kind of traditional frameworks go. And Andrew, you've used that too. So what are your reflections?
I have, and I think one of the things around the Landscape of Me tool is it's helpful to do that on myself as well. Some of the questions on there I hadn't really explored. What's the strength in my diversity? What diversity? What makes me different?
Yeah.
And it helped me explore a little bit about my identity, and then get a little bit more curious and unpack things that I can then use with my clients. So I think that specific tool, Landscape of Me, was good for me, but also helpful for clients. And it also can be quite provocative. So in my experience of using that tool, some clients don't want to answer some of those questions. That's data. Some of them want to send it through you in advance. So they've kind of spent a load of time. That's data. Others kind of bring it with them, and then you work. So that all of that's data. So it's a really helpful way of setting up a conversation, I think. Yeah.
Great.
Paul, you use that, right? Too. Is there anything you'd add to that?
No, I think you've both spoken to it quite eloquently. What I would say is, it's a great foundation. It's a great foundation for the start of a coaching relationship. And to the extent that it can be something that is done, offline, so to speak, it doesn't have to be done in a session of itself. That in and of itself creates a sense of security and safety for the coaching relationship, because I haven't started by asking you questions that you might find really provocative and deep and personal.
Yeah.
In a coaching session.
And
you've had the time to reflect, and it eases you then into this coaching in the diversity space.
Maxine's asking, where can we find that tool? I think that's a great question, Maxine, and that may be part of the next webinar, or as part of the kind of ongoing from there. So 25th of November, right? I'm looking at Carol.
Yes,
yes.
25th of November.
Beatrice is asking the same thing. What's the framework called? The Landscape of Me. That's right.
It's called The Landscape of Me. And one of the things, again, our intention in terms of building this tribe, is to build the capacity, the capability, the competencies, the skills of borderless coaches. And so we will be, hopefully running a program where we will be pulling all of this together. So please join that.
Great question here, or comment, question as well. We need to move away from framing conversations about race as uncomfortable, difficult, and challenging. Do we need to change our language and stop acknowledging awkwardness in the engagements with others?
I so love that question. And, when we explore, when we explore white privilege, it takes on many different forms. And that's kind of one of them, I feel quite strongly about, is the minute we begin to describe things and label them as being uncomfortable and challenging, and, it's put in the too difficult box, you're on a highway to nowhere potentially. And it's a bit of a red herring. It really can be a red herring. And so a wonderful coaching question is, how do we make this simple? Right? How do we actually make this simple? And also I think it was in Different Women, I think it was a Black African woman who said, uncomfortable is what we experience every day, as a minority majority context. So have a little of that, and let's work and let's work together. Let's kind of partner around that. So whoever said that, you're my best friend, my sister, my brother forever, because these are some of the things that, as borderless coaches, in terms of facilitating around race, that we need to recognize and not collude with. No collusion.
I think I would add to that in terms of, I often looked at difference as a difficulty to be overcome in a coaching relationship, as opposed to, exactly right, it's one of my key learnings, as opposed to the delights of difference, right? I've heard, Carol's talked about the delights of difference, and it just reframing it in that way is, I found very helpful for me. So,
It's very much that switch from a deficit model when it comes to race, to recognizing the value add, the strength, the value that comes from difference, and framing the conversations, framing the engagement, framing the relationship from that perspective.
And one of our core principles is diversity is a strength. That's one of the core principles of a borderless coach. That's the mindset that you bring to your engagement with your client, is your diversity is a strength. It's a powerful strength. And our role is to uncover that, to reveal that, to make that more, to amplify it in the coaching space.
I'd like to add in just a little bit to that. Just from a neuroscience perspective, our brains don't like doing different things. We get to this whole fear reaction that happens. I'm entering into a different space. Of course, we're going to be nervous or feeling a little destabilized. And I think that's temporary. And I totally agree with this. Let's move away from framing conversations about race as uncomfortable, but let's jump into our discomfort, because the more we do something, the more comfortable it becomes, and just acknowledge, this is different. this is different and new, and I haven't had these kind of conversations before, and it might be terrifying at first, or at least completely unnerving. That's okay. That's not going to last forever. So let's jump into that. For me, it's normalizing some.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, another question from Anne-Marie. Hi, Anne-Marie. How would you deal with a coaching client who is explicitly racist in the coaching space? Good question.
So again, authentic being, kind of core principle for me, and in the coaching space, is that coaching space has got to be mutually respectful. That's a core value, and it's not just a said value, it's a lived one. And so from that point of view, if anybody was explicitly racist with me, I heard somebody talk about, do you want to coach presidents? And I immediately thought of Donald Trump. And I thought to myself, that's a moment for me to say, no, it's actually, this coaching relationship does not honor me, does not honor my principles. And so for me, that would probably end the coaching conversation if the person was explicitly racist. If the person, racism again takes on many different terms, different forms. I mean, if it was subtle racism, I might use that and play that back. So someone once was talking to me about being, Carol, you're quite scary. So I use that word scary to have a deeper, meaningful conversation about some of the connotations of that word when it comes to being a Black woman.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
I think, I would just echo what Carol said. I would first look to feed back to them in a coaching context by asking them powerful questions to get them to reflect on themselves and their behavior, and to reflect on how they impact upon others. If at the end of the day that's not getting us anywhere and they're still being explicitly racist, then we have no basis for a coaching relationship. So it should end.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here's a great question from Amy. So Amy works with young college-age women. She focuses a lot about empowering them to find their voices, encouraging them to network and reach out to people blindly to find careers and opportunities. And Amy says that she's realizing this might feel very threatening to women of color because of structural / systemic racism. Can you please help me teach this concept and be mindful that people of color face these boundaries daily?
So what's the actual question in that? Can you help me?
So Amy focuses a lot helping people find their, helping young college-age women find their voices and encouraging them to network and reach out to people to find careers and opportunities. But she's realizing that her help might feel threatening because of structural systemic racism.
I think I mean, in terms of a response, maybe that's something that happy for you to connect, with us. I'm, Emma, if you're there, or Joe, if you can put my email address in the chat, because it's a slightly longer conversation. I think that's what it warrants. So happy to respond to that, Amy, offline.
Great stuff. Atena came up with a great idea. We should have done this. Can you please add a poll about the diversity of the participants? Maybe next time, Atena.
Yeah, we will certainly do that.
A couple of people have mentioned that. As a coaching professional, is it okay to just focus on the particular diversity strand in which you have life experience and are comfortable with?
Does that
Again,
mean
I think yeah, go on. No, Laurie, you go for it.
I just wanted to understand the question in terms of topics, or in terms, is it like only coach people like you, or I guess I didn't understand the question. Maybe you did, Carol.
Well, is it okay to just focus on the particular diversity strand in which you have life experience and are comfortable with?
Oh, absolutely. I would say yes, and it's equally important to be able to focus on all the other diversity, and all the other diversity strands. As a boardless coach, someone that coaches in this space, I've had to be as comfortable talking about race as I am talking about sexual orientation, as I am talking about, about religion and, religion and belief. And also using myself, that's one of the things that we can do in terms of borderless. But I think as a borderless, you have to be kind of fully grounded in what multiple forms of oppression look like. Otherwise, it becomes quite hypocritical, I think.
Okay.
Remember, as a borderless coach, it starts with understanding self, and understanding self in all our dimensions of diversity, because then that's what then positions us to have that meaningful conversation with people who may be the same as us in some dimensions, but different in others.
Yeah. So I'm conscious we're on 17:30, 5:30. So, Andrew, can I thank you for just facilitating the question so brilliantly. Thank you, Laurie, for just being on this journey with us. Paul, thank you for bringing your authentic self to this. I'm also thanking Joe, thanking Barbara for making sure that this all ran to time and it was as smooth as, for Emma, who's kind of in the background, to all of you who stayed behind and are still here listening to my voice. Thank you so much. We have work to do. Maya Angelou said this: I did what I did then because I didn't know. And now that I know, I must do differently. So let's go make change happen. Remember, #Coaches for Change, and see you on the 25th of November, 2020. Thank you.